This episode of Positively Trek is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon, including Jim Stoffel, Joyce Marin, Carl Morris, and our associate producer, William Smith. Visit patreon.com/positivelytrek to help support the podcast. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, shoutouts, associate producer credits, and more. Thank you all very much for your support, and enjoy the show.
Wow, is that a book?
When I was a kid, after my parents were killed, my foster mother on Vulcan used to read it to me and her son. She and I were the only humans in the house. It's how I learned that the real world doesn't always adhere to logic. Sometimes down is up. Sometimes up is down. Sometimes when you're lost, you're found.
So I just fell down through this rabbit hole in reading a book called Star Trek Discovery Wonderlands. Welcome to Positively Trek, everyone. I'm Bruce Gibson with Dan Gunther. How are you, Dan?
Hey, Bruce. Doing well, and really excited to talk about this book.
Me too. And in order to do that, we've invited the author onto the show here, Una McCormack. How are you, Una?
I am very well, guys. Very good to be back and chatting to you fellas again. So thanks for having me.
Excellent. Really happy to have you on, yeah.
Absolutely. And, you know, the book, we just finished reading it. It's fresh in our heads. Is it fresh in yours?
No, it's not. It's really funny. I wrote it. It's probably just under a year since I finished it. And I think it was sort of that first 6 months of being in the pandemic, and I was homeschooling. My daughter was at home. So I was doing a full-time job in the morning writing, and then a full-time job in the afternoon teaching. And I have literally no memory of writing this book. I remember being very tired, but I've reread it since. So when I reread it, I thought, oh, I'm quite pleased with this.
Okay.
All things considered, this isn't a bad book. So I'm just pleased it exists.
We're pleased it exists too. So I'm glad you got through to rereading it to refresh your mind.
Yeah.
We're going to refresh your memory on this too. So that should help. So I'm curious though, because this does take place in season 3 after episode 1. So if you would just kind of tell us how you got into this process and involved into writing this particular novel.
Well, as ever, these days, I sort of got an email from the guys over at Simon & Schuster saying we have quite an obvious gap for a novel, discovery novel here, which is in this lost year of Michael Burnham's. Would you like to fill it? And I think when we were first sort of mooting the book, this would mean that I was getting scripts ahead of you guys being able to see it, which I love doing. Obviously, it's like, yeah, that'd be fantastic. So I kind of jumped at that. I was really interested to see what they were going to do with this. I thought it was a really interesting premise. This leap into the future. So I really wanted to see what they were doing. And then this was just such an obvious gap for storytelling, because I'm assuming that if people are listening, that they'll have seen Discovery season 3 by now. If you've not, this might be a good time to stop. So, anyway, as we know, she has this year before Discovery arrives, Michael Burnham, and there are a few throwaway lines, I think, during one episode where she and Book's kind of, do you remember that time when that time at the cantina at Mos Eisley kind of thing. So they throw all these escapades around, and I think the idea of the book was what else happened in that year, because that's quite a scary place to be.
Exactly. Was this your idea to write this time frame this year, or did that come from the publisher? That came from
the publisher, and I guess then that would mean that it came from the folks making the show, that they have a pretty good idea of what books they want to be tying into the show now. So that's all quite well integrated these days. So the idea came from them, and I said, yeah, fantastic. I'd love to write about Burnham. I think that's a really, I hadn't really written about her before, or maybe thought about her much before. I'd done a Tilly book. And as you guys probably know, any chance to write one of the women of Star Trek, I'll kind of yeah, hand it here. So so I went with that one.
Excellent. Yeah, that was one thing Bruce and I talked about a lot when that first couple episodes of Discovery came, and we were wondering, like, oh, those adventures during that year, maybe we'll get a Short Treks episode or something like that. And I feel like it's a bonus we got a novel, because you can go really in depth and really explore a lot of those things that happen, and that relationship she has with Book and all of the other characters as well. So yeah, I ate this up, because I got to say, I was really curious about that year long before we got this novel. So
good. It was a gift, really. I think the way I tried to think about it, I thought, okay, we've got a year, and that's basically what a season of Star Trek covers. So let's try and think of this. I think I kind of shaped it in my mind as sort of like you were getting a season of Discovery with Burnham. So it should kind of feel with an opening two-parter and a climactic two-parter, and maybe a kind of quiet episode 7 or something like that. And that's what it has. The book has quite an episodic feel, but some characters kind of pick up and carry through. So it should feel like a sort of little extra season of Discovery stuck in book form.
That's how it worked for me. I'm glad you said that, because as I was reading it, I was noticing once I would get into a chapter that it seemed to have a beginning, middle, and end to it, but there's a continuing story throughout this. It's not just separate stories, but it did feel like I'm moving on to the next episode. And I thought, did she purposely try to make it feel like a season? Because that's what it feels like to me.
It's like, I know what I'm doing. Not even now.
This is going to be like, in my mind, the like season 3.5 of Discovery.
Lovely.
Because
really nice.
It really fits in there so well.
Yeah.
And that's actually something we haven't gotten a lot of in the Discovery novels, are novels that actually fit within the timeline of the series as well. So, there have been a couple other ones recently, but mostly before they were kind of prequels or sticking outside of the timelines. So
yeah.
Was there kind of a particular challenge to making this one fit in that year? Was there anything that like you kind of thought about afterwards, like, oh shoot, I need to make sure to include this or tie that in somehow?
I think the tricky thing was not laying it on too thick. So you have to assume that people aren't reading the book, yeah. So you can't put anything in or it's the other way around, really. You can't put anything in the book that will have ramifications for what's on screen, because people won't be reading the book. So I kind of had to hold the book Burnham story not in abeyance, but make it, they can't come to any kind of resolution, because that happens on screen. So you just have to sort of kind of take them through that story. So I think that was kind of the trickiest thing, was finding where the stories are happening that wouldn't sort of obviously Disco couldn't turn up, and everything had to be found outside of Discovery in a way. Yeah. And you just had to hope. That probably meant more invention than usual. Usually I'm able to kind of rely much more on characters that we see a lot of. So I think that was, and sometimes you think, is that going to carry people? Because, if they picked up a Disco book, well, of course, was Saru, Oh, it's got Disco on the cover, so you don't want to feel that people are picking out a Disco book under false pretenses. But I think if you, the only responses I've had when you've said it's about the lost year, they've gone, oh, fantastic. I was really wondering what was happening there. And so long as people are there for that story, then you're just going to have to give them sort of extra characters. But there is a lot of Book and Burnham. I mean, they're there a lot. And they were really what I had to hang it on, because they would be the people that people would know. Sahil is there as well, and he gets lots of page time because he was so lovely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were excited to see him there. That's for sure. So, it's interesting you saying that, because it does feel like a Discovery novel to me, even though it doesn't have the Discovery crew, because the series really is the journey of Michael Burnham for the most part. And so this just felt like a continued part of her journey of getting from what we saw of her of episode 1 of season 3 into the next episode, or I should say episode 3 or whatever of Discovery. And it felt natural to me. And I really loved the relationship between her and Book in this. I mean, you nailed it. I just like thought, I mean, I could just read books about the two of them together all the time.
Do you know what? I could just write books about that. I'm glad it worked. I think that's one of those things where, as a writer, you go, "Oh, I've got 90,000 words to write. That's quite a lot." And then you kind of go, "Oh, I've just done 5 pages of these two just snarking at each other and brushing cat fur up from the rug." And they really, really fill the pages, and it never felt like filler either when you were writing them. They just felt like they were sparkling on the page. They got such chemistry, the two actors. It's and the two characters. I think he's sort of making her relax, and she is making him raise his game, I think. And so they just work really well. And it's just really nice to see Burnham, I think, have a bit of fun.
Yes.
Mm. Just have a relationship that's not driven by angst or she's got this crazy situation that she's in, and he's pretty roguish, but he's actually quite a decent bloke. So can I get more British? He's a decent bloke. So that was quite refreshing, I think, to be writing Burnham in that way, to be thinking about Burnham in that way. I just loved writing them. They were a hoot.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that part of the story as well. And it took me a little bit to put my mind back to where she and Book were at the end of that first episode, that, I kind of think of them, oh, they're inseparable, they're pals. Wait, they really weren't. She did break his nose and hit him a large number of times. So there's still that antagonistic relationship there. And I really
in a very loving way, I think.
Yeah, totally.
It's like Bashir shooting Garrick. You think that's practically a kiss.
Exactly. But yeah, over the course of the story, we do get that evolution as well. And like you say, you can't quite get to that resolution, but we see the seeds of that. And I love that kind of natural progression of it through the book.
Yeah, I really enjoy doing it. I think you're very lucky as a writer, because the actors have to do this cold in a way. I mean, their job is to present to you two people who have known each other for a year that you, the viewer, have not seen. Whereas I get to go through all those beats, which is why actors are so clever. They need to persuade you of that in pretty much the very first scene that you see in episode 3 or whatever it is that they are together. So they have to feel like they're much more intimate or know each other much, much better than you actually have seen them. But I got to sort of put all that glue in, so it was good fun. And then David Ajala tweeted about my book, which is even nicer.
Oh, excellent!
Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, because I like to think that the actors are going to read this book, because it's like they really should. This is their characters.
Well, Adil Hussein tweeted to say he'd bought it, so I hope he reads it. It'd be lovely. He's been really nice on Twitter as well, so that was very thrilling. Because there is a lot of Sahil in there, because, again, I thought this was such a great character, a really interesting person. And, of course, there's just that season's having to do much, much more than focus on him. But I just found it. I think I'd seen a kind of rough cut of episode 1. So I'd seen that character, I'd seen that performance, and it had really stuck in my mind as really, really poignant. And what sort of life he must have led with this constant kind of hoping. And you usually it kind of, I'm 32 now, I better give up on my dreams, And this guy doesn't. He just kind of keeps on hoping, and then in she walks, and that's incredible. It's being proved right. So I loved that performance. I really wanted to put as much of that character as possible in the book, and what his life must have been, and his grandmother, I think, figures quite heavily in the book as well, in an oblique way. We get her journals of the burn. So I really want to sort of work through and deepen that.
I'm really glad you brought up Sahil, because he is one of my absolute favorite characters. We had the tremendous opportunity to talk with Adil Hussein on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Episode 88, I believe. And his warmth and just genuine spirit as a human being, both as the character and as the actor, I think really comes through in this book. You really captured that well.
Good. I'm glad about that. Really good, really good. So I got very fond, as I say, just the screen time that he has. I wanted more of that. There was something of that yearning, that desire for better times, that sense of things that are lost. This is a very Brexit book, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I do want to start letting people know who are listening now. I want to get deep into this book. I want to get into the spoiler territory here because I don't want to dance around some things, but I'm glad we're talking about Sahil, and we just talked about book, and there was something about these two that really stood out to me because when I think about the original series and we have Kirk and then you've got the Spock, the logical, and then you've got Bones there grumbling and complaining and realistic about how things should go. I kind of thought that way about these three, that Michael Burnham is there in the middle trying to relive that dream and bring that dream back to this time, but at the same time understanding that it may not be practical and maybe she needs to live in the moment. And Book and Sahil are like two opposite ends of her, sitting on her shoulders, talking to her about live the dream, don't live the dream. And I kind of want to investigate more into that whole relationship of those three.
That's exactly what they absolutely seemed the triangle heart of the book. And that one was, I think they both, it's not as they're each on one shoulder, but it's not that one is an angel or one is a devil. One is saying, don't forget what was good about this. And the other one is saying it's gone. You have to live with that. You've got to be real and accept this reality. And then this one is going, but at the same time, Book is sort of saying, there's a moment in the book where she kind of tells him her life story, and he goes, that's not right.
I love that.
and he's saying to her, a lot of his appeal to her, I think, is he's saying, life doesn't have to be like that. Life can be lived more freely. Life can be lived more in the moment, taking more pleasure, and you're allowed to be happy. And that, I think, is a very strong appeal of the life that she leads and where she goes to in this book. And at the same time, Sahil is saying things like, yes, but this is your command. You're the Starfleet officer in this area, and people rely on this ship, and it's not as straightforward as that. And there are still little fragments of this civilization left, and maybe you do still have a duty to them. And there were good things about the Federation. People didn't hunt endangered species or slave trade, or they could negotiate peace. And there are very positive things, obviously, about not living in a cutthroat, hyper-capitalist world of killers and mercenaries. So he's reminding her of all that. So I wanted it. It is two voices on her shoulder, but they're each angels in a way. They're angels of different parts of what her life could or might be. And that absolutely, that trio drives what I think of as the story engine. I think books are always more interesting when you don't have antagonist, protagonist, when you get this sort of three-way play of different pools of relationships. And I think even Book and Sahil do respect each other. But I think is it Sahil has a moment where he wonders, one of them has a moment of wondering what Book might have done with his life had he been born at the height of the Federation. Not always having to make a deal or see where the next bit of money is coming from. And I think there's an idealist hiding inside Book, like all disillusioned people, I think, and she's coaxing that out of him, and he's coaxing the pragmatist out of her. So yeah, definitely those three were the heart of the book for me, and seeing them bounce off each other. Good, glad that worked. It's always good.
The interesting thing to me about the triangle is, of course, the piece that's Burnham. Well, all the pieces of, but the Burnham piece, and the fact that she's very persistent and wanting to fix things. That's something about her character. She's always trying to fix things, while at the same time she's trying to fit in. And that's something we've seen throughout the series of, kind of being a fish out of water, but then also like trying to fit in and fix things. And that triangle seems to help her and guiding her in through these different things. So how does this situation with Burnham describe where she is at this point?
I think that's being a fish out of water is completely right. You think of her arriving on Vulcan, and I mean, it's bad enough that her parents have just died, but then she has to kind of modify her behavior to fit into this very, very, very strange alien environment. And then again and again, I think she's always trying to. So she's at the other end of that experience. She kind of pops out as a human Vulcan, human something, having to fit in into Starfleet. Then as the jailbird, having to fit in as the person that caused all this mayhem. It's the story of her life in a way. So in some ways, she's quite well equipped to find herself kicked 1,000 years into the future. But having to, make herself fit in, it's something she's had to do again and again and again. She's
Alice in Wonderland.
She absolutely. Oh, what a great title for a book! Think of that one. So, her legs not. I put that image in somewhere. Don't her of Alice trying to fit into that house where her legs don't fit. She's never quite fitting in a box. And part of what happens in this book is that she starts to fit, and then the ship comes back, and you think, oh no, you just kind of found a place to. You've found a way to make this work, and now your bloody friends have turned up and spoiled it. Yeah, and she should feel ambivalent at the end of the book. I think
that to me was always a really heartbreaking scene in season 3 when Tilly says to her, "You've moved on, haven't you?" And there's just that pause, and she doesn't say anything, and then she says, "It's really good to see you, Tilly," and hugs her, and I'm just like. Oh, because like I really connected with that feeling somehow, and I can't even think of when exactly in my life it was or something like that. But like I was like, oh, I felt that before. That just felt so real, and you really show us the build up to that, and the moment where it's the hardest thing she has to do is let go and admit that this may not ever come back, and I have to live with that.
Yep.
And it's so shortly after that Discovery shows up. And now what do I do?
She's just made that break. I guess it would. I suppose it's almost banal in a way, but that when you go away at 18 to college or something, and you spend the first 4 months going, I want to be home. I'm so frightened. This is appalling. What have I done? You go home and you go, everything is so small. How did I ever live here? Will you please stop ordering me to do things? Don't you know that I've been living on my own for? So that was sort of the emotion I was tapping. I think.
Oh, totally.
I hadn't been flung 1,000 years into the future, and but it's that kind of feeling of no longer fitting into a smaller box, but people want you back in there because they loved having you there. Yeah, but life has changed and moved you on.
Yeah, when you leave your hometown or your friends for years and you come back and you're a completely different person, but your friends still, they don't know you. They know the past you, and they relate to you on that level. Yeah.
And then they try and get you to act like that person, and you're irritated because you feel like you're being put back in and falling back into old patterns and things. You go, no, I'm like this now. And they're going, well, I don't have any frame of reference to you being like that. So a little bit of that. And then at the same time, just the pleasure of seeing these people again that, she thought she might never see. So yeah, I think that's probably what I was tapping into.
That just reminded me, I don't think I ever changed, because a friend of mine from college told me, she's like, gosh, you're the same you were then. I'm like, are you suggesting I should have changed? Come on. I didn't grow up. Oh, well.
Well done, you.
But as we're talking about this subject, it's making me think about how there's certain planets that cut themselves off from the rest of the galaxy, because once the burn happened, I guess we need to probably talk through all that too, but the burn happened, and of course the Federation isn't around anymore, and there's some worlds that feel like, we have to just do this on our own, and then there's people on those worlds like Zuka, and is it
Beignet.
that,
Mm-hmm.
leave the planet, even though Beignet doesn't want to leave. But as Burnham's talking to her, she's explaining, I can't all go home either. I can relate to this.
Yeah. I think once I started thinking about it as episodic, that sort of opened up the book for me. And part of when we were sort of talking about it when we were talking with the guys back at Pocket and in the studio, we were sort of saying, well, what can we do? And we thought a good idea would be to look at worlds where how different the experience of the burn had been. So the burn, what happens is that it's like the dilithium will short, so the spaceships drop out of warp, and you can't connect all these planets that are far flung. You can't go into warp to connect these planets as quickly as you could. So effectively, it's going to take lifetimes to get from small parts of the Federation to the other. So the whole kind of infrastructure that's holding this vast space together just goes poof, and you can't get to places. You just can't get there. And how do you? It'd be like all the Roman roads suddenly collapsing, or all the. I guess the equivalent would be all the slaves or all the horses. Not that they are equivalent. They all drop dead. So your infrastructure completely goes, and you can't connect all these places together. That would leave places extremely isolated. And some would be fine because they're quite self-sufficient. But some would not be fine because the only reason that they can exist is that they're connected to a large intergalactic stellar federation that brings in supplies and resources and all kinds of things. So some places would do fine and some places would do very badly. And the ones that were doing very badly would then start to look round at other places and go, well, what can we get and what can we have? So the infrastructure that holds this together just goes overnight, and you get sort of small pockets of places that are able to shore themselves up a little bit, and places that kind of collapse. It's a really interesting scenario. It's sort of I really had the kind of the end of the Roman Empire in mind, because I think there's a particular it's particularly there's a particular effect, I think, in Britain. There's a lot more continuity if you look at kind of archaeology and documentation in mainland Europe. But in Britain, what you kind of get is we have this sort of gap of archaeological record and certainly of documentation from sort of the last Roman soldiers leaving to the kind of early medieval period, where you start to see monasteries making records. So we have this sort of gap where people are kind of going, well, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe there was a guy with a magic sword called Arthur. That's my best guess.
Right.
So we have this sort of, and my other half is very interested in this. He every so often he tells me where something else has been discovered that's just made that gap a little bit shorter. So it's like where there's this little thread of history that's gone silent. And every so often we pick up a little transmission from somewhere, and this thread gets a little bit more connected. So I thought that must have been what the burn must have felt like. Suddenly, Rome stopped taking your calls, and you've got the centurion in Gloucester going, "Hang on, lads, I'll have your orders in a moment. I'm not getting anything from the centre. We're going to have to make something up." That must have been what it felt like. It's just silence comes from where all the orders and direction are coming, and you've just got to work out what to do. And I think I put some Roman poetry in there. There's some Anglo-Saxon poetry of she's really, really evocative of the Anglo-Saxons kind of arriving in Britain and looking at all these massive buildings and going, what the heck? How are these guys able to put these bridges up? We're dealing in wattle and daub over here. These massive stone things, and they kind of nickel the stones and make churches out of them, and that's why we don't have any archaeological record in Britain. So all of that was kind of in the back of my mind. This kind of almost the Dark Ages in a way, but on an interstellar stage. Am I making any sense at all?
Yeah, this felt like the Dark Ages, of the Federation. It really did. I mean, actually, to me, I don't know how Dan feels about this, but I felt when I was reading the book that the galaxy situation made more sense to me than I picked up on the show. I mean, it worked on the show, but this just added more to it. Like, I really felt like these people are so cut off. The Federation is a distant memory, or it's practically doesn't even really exist. It's like this thing that used to be, and we don't even know how true it really was. And I loved how it wasn't just, the Federation just, went away in one day because of the burn. There were other cracks leading up to it, because it makes sense that it wouldn't just fall just immediately.
Yeah, and we really, really thought about that. And again, I think I modelled this on Rome, and watching what's happening. I'll be honest, watching what's happened in the European Union over the last 10 years or so, I mean, wow, it's what, 5 years since Brexit now, unbelievably. Watching what's happened over the past 15 years, maybe, that these federations or empires or whatever we want to call them, they get very big, and maybe there'll be some senior powers. You might want to call them Earth, Vulcan, Telor and Andor, or France, Germany, Italy and Britain, and somebody goes off in a huff because they don't quite feel they're getting their slice of the pie, no matter how huge their slice of the pie is. Rah, 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 grumble. And smaller places are going, well, we don't feel like equal powers, and you're not listening to us, and everybody's doing what they want, what people in Frankfurt and Paris and Strasbourg want, but they're not listening to us over here in Tallinn. And we're getting a bit antsy about this, and all these strains lead to a kind of that when the crack happens, and it's very dramatic in the case of the burn, they're physically cut off. Some places go, well, actually, we weren't really getting all that much from those guys. Let's just kick off here. And other people go, and you've seen this in Britain with people who 5 years on still aren't coming to terms with the fact that, guys, we really have left the European Union. Yeah, we've left. It's going to be. I don't like it, but it's happened. Yeah, and it's going to be 30 years, if ever, if the EU survives, because it's doing a very, very good job of setting itself on fire at the moment. And that kind of mourning that you observe in people, they're just not, they can't come to terms with it. And then you imagine that happening in Gloucester in the sort of 5th century. Tiberius down the road, every Saturnalia, he just goes through the motions, and he's got to get past it. That the legions aren't turning up, and that was sort of what I wanted to make it feel. And people would be saying that about Sahil. People coming through that spaceport would be going, bless him. He flies that flag, and he gets it out every day, and God love him, but they're not coming. Oh, they've come.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because of course we're dealing in a universe of time travel and these kinds of things. So I'm really interested to see what they do in season 4 with this background. It's going to be very interesting to see. Yeah.
Absolutely. I felt like the situation on the one planet, Ikasu, the one that had cut itself off and was prospering quite a bit and was doing quite well, kind of was anticipating what we learn about Earth in season 3 as well. And I'm really curious to get back to Earth, hopefully in Discovery at some point as well, and find out how that progresses, because they had cut themselves off from the Federation as well. And I think the captain in that episode says, why would we stay in the Federation? We've got everything we need here. We can't be bothered to look after all these other people. We're self-sufficient. And that was very Brexity in my mind when I was watching that as well. And it really makes a lot of sense that pattern would happen in all sorts of places in the Federation as well.
Yeah. And I mean, certainly I had that in mind with a place like Ikasu, and maybe they've been quite late joining. They had quite a distinctive culture that I think they were quite they were materially physically, biophysically quite connected to their oceans, aren't they? So there are reasons for them perhaps not to travel too much. They like to be in these they like to be on their world, yeah. So they, maybe the Federation was just, oh, that's okay, we can trade a bit more, we can get it's pleasant to see these places or have people arrive. But now that you've gone, we find actually it's not made much difference. We're self-sufficient, the population's small enough, resources are good enough, we can get by. And the longer that would happen, the more that they would drift away from the central kind of culture, I suppose. They wouldn't feel Federation anymore. Might look a bit high tech, or might even do some things in the same way, but they wouldn't feel Federation anymore. And once you don't feel that anymore, you just can't carry people with you. We're never going to bring these Brexiteers back. They were never in it anyway. They never felt that way. So and now they feel that way even less. So but they're doing fine on Ikasu. I think they won't have any problems. It's very nice there.
Yeah. I think there's some people here that do still feel the Federation, the reenactors, which was, I thought this was a fun concept. I'm just curious as to why you went this direction, because as I was reading this, I was thinking, okay, these are a bunch of cosplayers that are in the future living out this fantasy of a past, like we in the present live out this fantasy of a future. It's almost like, cosplay before the Federation, cosplay after the Federation.
Or like Renaissance cosplayers or
That's
Civil War reenactors. Yeah.
I was just about to say, I could literally well, I couldn't do it now because of COVID. But I could catch the train up the road to Ely, and Ely is there's a house there, which is where Oliver Cromwell lived, and I could see English Civil War reenactors there, regularly. There's a medieval fair happens down the road from here. All of these things, I could walk into one of the churches and see people put on, almost medieval garb. So there's a lot of that about. Catch a train into Norfolk. They had a World War II cosplay day out there one time I was there. They have a little steam train there, and they put on kind of 40s celebrations. So I thought I got the idea of the reenactors from one of the scripts. I thought it was in one of the scripts. So maybe it didn't get on screen. It's just a very throwaway line about reenactors. I thought it was from one of the scripts, and everyone's kind of picked up on this. So I'm wondering now whether it got cut, didn't make it to the air, because of course I see these things. But I really did roll with it. I thought it was in the first mercantile that book takes her to. I thought there was a throwaway line, but as I say, I might have got a version of the script that had a line cut or something like that.
Well, what I'm going to do is go back and watch that episode just to see.
Absolutely,
if it's still there. I don't remember.
It's in a mercantile, and he kind of flipping reenactors. And I just thought that was brilliant and so rich, and how much you could do with that.
That does kind of sound familiar.
These guys would be. Yeah, and these guys would be, they wouldn't quite get the dimensions of the thing right because they've not really seen a delta, but it'd be beautifully made, or because cosplay is just incredibly well done. But it's a world that they've lost. It's a nostalgia, but I think it still speaks to the same kind of yearning that we're all Star Trek fans. We all kind of go. But it would be cool to live in shiny space, post-scarcity future. That would be amazing, obviously. And they're thinking the same thing, but looking to the past, I think.
Yeah. I had a big feeling of that reading this and thinking like the parallels between us cosplaying and dreaming about this wonderful future, and of course them. And this one part that just really summed it up for me. It says, sometimes when she did try to explain, people looked at her in bafflement, as if the whole idea of a moneyless society in which people were able to lead lives that allowed them to grow to their full potential was simply unfathomable. They latched onto the simplest things, the outward signifiers. They put on the uniforms, they collected the artifacts, they obsessed about the regulations. But none of these were the Federation. None of these had made Starfleet. And I really see that, like, when I get starry-eyed and start talking about like, oh, the future of blah, blah, blah. And then you get the people that just don't see it and they don't feel like, oh, there's no sense working towards that brighter future because that's not possible. Human nature makes it impossible, blah, blah, blah. And that gets so discouraging. So I was really latching onto these characters here thinking like, oh, kindred spirits, true believers. I love it.
True believers. Yeah, that's exactly it. And, we're all, we're not as young as we were, any of us, but we're still watching these daft old shows. And that's because they do say they're still holding this sort of promise to us that we can organise and live in the world better in better ways, I think. And it's poignant when and we're living. I think we're all Gen Xers, aren't we, or millennials? We're kind of going, well, we sort of see that it was easier to buy houses, or it was easier to do certain kinds of things maybe 30, 40 years ago. Standard of living feels like it's dropping, and maybe we all feel like we're living in societies that are not quite living up to their potential in a way that they used to. In other ways, it's better, definitely better. But in other ways, and partly it's because we're constantly being told how amazing it was at Woodstock, and partly maybe we're feeling that some things maybe we can always be nostalgic about things and forget that things are much, much better. I think it's easy to look in the middle of a pandemic to look back and go, weren't things better then? Because they actually were. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I think you're constantly having to say, well, what made this book interesting was that sense of a desire for something better. I had to juggle it being looking to the future or being a kind of nostalgia, and you don't want to fall into nostalgia. You want to be forward looking and trying to make things better rather than to fall back into old ways. And Burnham is being told that this amazing world that she came from is the past. It's done. It's finished. We don't have space or time for that anymore in our lives. But she can't help flying the flag.
Yeah. And then we've got the space station, which was Starbase 906, which now has been renamed Vanguard. And we have the White Palm Raiders. I thought that was an interesting thing, too, because in a sense, it's like, okay, they're the bad guys of this book, but in a way, they're just a product of the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to play it. I think ultimately, this is quite tricky because ultimately you do kind of need an antagonist. But mustache twirling villains are just boring. They're just no fun at all. And I think I needed what I wanted was again. I think I went back to that model I went back to thinking about what it must have been like in post-Roman Britain, where you basically have a bunch of warlords kind of riding around going, "No, follow me. I will kill fewer of you."
Yes.
But then others kind of go, "Well, no, actually, I've managed to make things a bit quieter. I've got rid of the particularly nasty bandits that were killing you all and nicking all your stuff. Things are a little calmer than they were. I'm not really very nice, but I'm about 50 billion times better than the other guy, and this is how we get the British royal family. They're the slightly less appalling warlords." So I just felt that there would be lots of these. We see it in the show. We see this kind of little bandit and warlord groups, and I thought, well, there would be ones who kind of are not gunslingers. They'd be bureaucrats. They'd be bureaucrat warlords. But they'd have the rough guys to do all the killing and the shooting and that kind of thing. But there'd be somebody going, well, what we need to do is get manufacturing up and running. We need to be doing this. We need to be doing that. Probably get some uniforms so that people feel like they're part of a movement or something. But they're just not very nice people. And to be able to do this, shall I spoil the book?
Yes.
Yeah. To be able to do this, they take over. The base that they're on is a Starfleet base that's operating very, very late in the day. So Burnham misses an operating Starfleet base we're meant to think it's a it's a handful of years, maybe 5 or 6 years, and that should really. I hope that feels like a blow, that you kind of go, oh God, they were there that long, and then these guys just came in and said, nope, we're having that. Thank you very much.
And she just missed it. Yeah.
Yeah. And which is, I kind of played with it happening during the action of the book, but I think it's more poignant if it's happened a little bit before, that she's just too late. She couldn't have saved them, but the proximity is so painful. I think that I could have, if the Red Angel suit had just popped me out a few years earlier, it's a little quantum glitch. I might have been there in time to save this base and just save a little bit more of what's ebbing and flowing and fracturing away. So that's where those guys came out. Partly I needed an antagonist, but I didn't want a dumb antagonist. I wanted something a little bit more interesting.
Mm-hmm. The ships were visually interesting, and it was just merely because of the description. I was thinking of the Urukai because of the white handprint. And I
did kind of have that in my mind. I find that a really arresting image, and I thought, let's stick that on a spaceship, and that's
cool.
That would look pretty cool. So yeah, I did kind of have that in mind.
Excellent. But yeah, the revelation, of course, that they're based out of this former Starfleet base, and I don't feel like I was surprised. Like it felt like it was kind of building towards that, but it was still just such a gut punch, of course, to Burnham. And then, of course, the thought in her mind that Ileana Padan, this Cardassian character, might have possibly betrayed her. And I thought she was a really interesting character. And I don't think you mentioned that she's Cardassian until about the second or third time she's brought up, but that name, that was so perfect.
Well, people would recognize it, wouldn't they?
Exactly. Yeah. So Ileana, like Ileana Gamor, and Padan is pretty close to Padar, a Cardassian name.
I was thinking it was close to Dan Gunther.
Well, she can be your character if you want.
Oh, excellent. But I mean, just when she's first mentioned, I was like, "Ooh, yes, Una McCormack's writing a Cardassian. Excellent."
Has to happen. It has to happen, and we don't know what happens in that intervening 900 years. So I talk of her as being, I think she says something about the Cardassian diaspora, and you just kind of chuck these things out and go, it can mean anything really, doesn't it? Because we don't know what happens between the end of what we leave behind and now. So all sorts of things could have happened to Cardassian. Maybe they joined the Federation, maybe they never did. All of these things, but Cardassians would be out and about and out there. I've been watching Enterprise again recently, which I kind of mainlined in about a month, and of course they don't. Then the Cardassians never mention it because, of course, the Federation haven't encountered. But you're thinking, well, I wonder what's happening back on Prime. Which republic are they in right now, and who's killing who, and is the Obsidian Order up and running yet? You've always got these things in the back of your mind. I've always got Cardassian history in my mind. So yeah, I thought I'd pop a Cardassian in just because why not?
Oh, for sure. And just a little side note, it's really funny you mentioned Enterprise, because that was one of the things that I wrote in my notes is the galaxy as it is now in this novel really feels like the pre-Federation time of Enterprise, where you've got like the Orion Syndicate doing their thing and, just various kind of unaligned worlds all bumping into one another and bumping heads. And I was really thinking, oh, this is kind of interesting. It's like once that political structure evaporates, it regresses to that kind of level as well. So I was wondering if that was in your mind a little bit while you were writing this.
I hadn't seen seen Enterprise pretty much. I'd seen a bit of it when it was on, but for various reasons I hadn't watched much of it. So I think it was quite tricky to watch it in Britain or something. So I didn't have that in mind, but it should have a frontier feel, this book, because that's how the kind of galactic politics and economics are shaking out. So yes, it does give it something in common with Enterprise. I think this should feel a little bit more like I think with Enterprise and original Trek, you're feeling more as if things are opening up. Yeah, that that people are connecting, because that's the story of Earth, and we're basically following the story of Earth. But this maybe feels a little bit more like you're shaking through the rubble. That's
right.
You're not in the early stages of putting something up. You're in the last stages of something falling down, or something has fallen down, and you're building the pieces up from that. So that maybe is the difference, perhaps. You're not at the beginning. You're not sort of at this stage of a curve. You're more at sort of this stage. I don't know. That's okay. For listeners on radio.
You're kind of at the same spot on that axis, but you're heading in a different
the other
direction.
end of a bump. Yeah, that's it. That's exactly that. For viewers on radio. Yeah.
It reminds me of the line that Sahil says about "I walk through the ruins left by giants."
Yeah, which is the Anglo-Saxon poem, "The Ruin." So it's a wonderful poem if people haven't read it. And I think we only have that poem in sort of a fragments as well. That sort of which makes it even more poignant. Of these Anglo-Saxons just wandering around, going, "These are big places." This is all in Tolkien as well, isn't it? They're kind of wandering around the Numenorian stuff, going, "Boy, those guys could build." Yeah. And that's how it should feel, kind of wandering around going, "Wow, these guys could build. Shame we do. Shame we can't." Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have anything else. I'm sure I'm missing something. Dan, what about you?
I can't remember the book. I'm amazed at how well I've...
You're doing good.
I thought I had more to talk about with Ileana, but I think we pretty much covered it.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's got some stuff at the end, doesn't she? She kind of... Her story to me was about getting to your late 40s and going, "Oh, no, I never sorted out that pension." Yeah. That's her story to me, is that she's kind of going, "What am I going to do?" And I get up in the morning, I feel tired, and I'm just, this was fine when I was 22 and maybe even 32, but at 45, this is ridiculous. This is a young person's game. I've just got to get out of this. And she tries to get out, but she's a soft touch, and people use her. But she does end up with a cushy space. So she ends up with a very comfortable chair. All I wanted for her was a very comfortable chair. So yeah.
Age plays its part in this, because even Sahil, I kind of felt bad. They keep talking about him like he's a really old man sometimes,
Yeah, and it's tricky because you sort of and it's something I kind of, because in the context of the Federation, he said he's a spring chicken,
right.
he's but we're not in that world anymore. And I think Book says this to her. So, next you'll be telling me it's true that you all lived into your hundreds. It's true. You all lived into your... Yeah.
Not anymore.
So not anymore. And you see, you're seeing this in, I think, haven't both the UK and the USA seen life expectancy decline? And not leaving aside COVID, they've seen a decline in life expectancy.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, now I really feel guilty for eating those Cheetos yesterday. Oh, I'm shortening my life.
Do you know, I don't think a single packet of Cheetos is going to make it.
Okay.
No, this is things like austerity politics hitting the poor, and you're seeing radically reduced life expectancy. So that would be true. And also, I think it's really, when we set up these worlds that are kind of like Wild West frontiers, I'm always looking at them going, well, this is all very well if you're kind of able-bodied and a certain age and have no connections and these sorts of things, but at some point you won't be well. At some point you will be tired, you might get injured, you might have dependents. How does the world work then? And that's why I gave the couriers this sort of little quiet world where their mums live. They're kind of grannies and great aunts, and people are all going, "Oh, well, I was a courier back in the day, but now I'm the venerable age of 67, retired." So that's what that world was about. it was sort of trying to subvert this Wild West mythos that we have, because people aren't just like that type. They're not gunslingers. They eventually, even a gunslinger grows old, I think.
Yeah, that was lovely, and just kind of another representation of the hope, right? Like the life can't just be this never-ending struggle, right? There's got to be something at the end of it. And I think, Burnham's desire for the Federation to come back kind of represents that as well. One other thing that popped into my head too is, of course, we see Burnham and Sahil interact in that first episode, and then we see in the final episode of the season that reunion. And I haven't gone back to watch that since reading this book, but it feels like this adds just a whole nother layer to that. Like, I just love that greeting between the two of them, the huge grin and the Commander Burnham, you found your way home. That scene. And now with this kind of built into it as well, it just feels like there's going to be that much more meaning behind that scene for the lucky of us who have read this book. So.
And again, aren't actors magic? The kind of weight and heft that those two performers put into that. And I have to go off and write a whole book, whereas they just imagine it. It's just really, really clever. And it's really clever people, actors. So, but yeah, I love that scene as well. He's great whenever he's on scene. I love that character. I hope there's more of that character.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah, we couldn't get the actor to tell us if he's going to be back or not, so we'll see. But we can always come back in books. That's what we have them for, right? So.
Exactly that. Absolutely.
And I did, and you mentioned earlier, I did like the logs from his grandmother, because we get to see that progression of what was going on at that time before and after the burn.
And that's the kind of I always feel a bit naughty putting logs in, because I'm kind of going, oh God, I've got so many words to write. Quick, let's do some letters or log entries. But they actually turned out to be an absolutely pivotal part of the book, because they're the bridge for us. That they tell us about the burn, and they give it as a first-hand account. So she's sort of at the start, she's kind of going, oh, I've just got back from a terrible Federation Council meeting. So annoying, blah, 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 blah. Oh, well, at least I'm on holiday now, but, having loads of fun time. But, holiday be over. I'm going back soon. Da, 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 da. Something a bit odd has happened. Not quite sure. Oh, Lord. And of course, what I'm writing about there was the month of going into lockdown over here, where you're kind of going, everything's great. I'm just, in February, I'd been in LA and kind of came home, and then sort of partway through March, there's something a bit odd going on around here. And then at the end of the March, the doors have sealed. There is no returning to Earth again. So it's exactly kind of mirroring. And I was writing this kind of June, July in lockdown. So it was mirroring. And I think everyone with any sense, maybe sometime in March or April or May, kind of, gulped, looked around and said, things are not going to be how they were for quite some time.
Absolutely.
So just sort of extrapolating that to a woman who knows it's never coming back.
And yeah, I did get that feeling reading that part of the story as well. I mean, like, the last day I worked was March 13th, 2020. So it's been brutal. So I got that feeling as well. And I was like, oh man, there's a lot of parallels here.
Yeah.
So I have to tell you, I got this book the day it came out, and in less than 48 hours, I finished it. I was engrossed. I just kept going. I was like, I'll just read one more chapter. And then, because the chapters are, kind of long, because they're like an episode, right? Because, it probably took me about an average 40 minutes maybe to finish a chapter or so. But I thoroughly enjoyed this thing. I couldn't wait to talk to you about it. I wanted to gush about it. I'm gushing now.
Oh, thank you.
And I gave it 5 stars in Goodreads, and you liked that when it came on Twitter. I'm good. I'm done. Dan, take it from here.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what Bruce said there. It's funny because I was trying to read this book really quickly because I got it on release day as well and knew that this conversation was coming up. The thing is, though, whenever I came to a scene with Sahil, I had to slow it down because I had to read it listening to his voice. And, we read a lot faster than a person speaks, but for all of those scenes, I just had to slow it down and hear in his voice. So it slowed it down a bit, but I was really able to take my time with those parts and really enjoy this book because, it was incredible and really added a lot, I think, to my enjoyment of season 3 as well. And just, it's just a banging story on top of that.
Oh, bless you.
Really enjoyed it.
Well, it was written in captivity pretty much. So it was a very odd experience to write it. And you're right. I think there are only 9 chapters. Usually I do sort of 12 or 15. So they were quite substantial. I think each one should feel almost like a little short story or novelette or something.
Yes.
But I've just been through, the response has just been really, really nice. People seem to have really enjoyed it. So I'm just delighted because, God, it was hellish time to write. So if it's kind of cheered people up a bit, then I'm really glad. Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, you're having a little bit of an internet connection, so issues here. So I'm just assuming it's because you're in that part of the galaxy right now, and Federation communications aren't what they used to be. But if you could tell us, what are you up to now? What are you working on?
So I guess the next thing that's coming out that folks will really enjoy is let's see what we've got. Wonderlands is out. Okay, yeah, we tick that one out. I've got the autobiography of Mr. Spock is coming out quite soon. I've been working on that, which I think folks will really enjoy. You'll see. Now I won't do any spoilers because I'm not messing that with the publisher. But if people know the books, we've had the autobiography of Kirk and Picard, and I wrote the Janeway one last year. So Mr. Spock is coming, and then what I'm wrapping up at the moment, I'm really excited about this, is a Firefly novel. Yeah. Which I've just had an absolute riot, very, very different from writing Spock. Writing Jane Cobb is sort of the antithesis in many ways. So that's called Carnival, and I'm just finishing up the first draft on that, and then that's going to go to the publisher sometime next week, I think. So that's the big thing. And then the other thing that I'd really like to put a shout out to is I'm working with a new science fiction imprint with Goldsmiths University Press, and we're trying to publish new voices in intersectional feminist science fiction. So if people out there are interested in hearing more about that, have a look at my Twitter feed. I've been tweeting about it, and we've got an open call for submissions for science fiction novels at the moment from underrepresented voices. So if people are interested in that, take a look, find out. Maybe you've got a novel that you think should be published and hasn't, the mainstream publishers won't look at it or whatever, then send it our way. So those are the things that I'm doing at the moment. And my immediate plans are to take August off.
Nice. Well deserved.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you're busy because I sent you an email yesterday and I got an email return saying it may take you a while to return emails because you're busy.
Yeah, one of my editors emailed back laughing at that one, saying, "Oh, that sounds so grumpy. You sound really tired." So I never usually set out of office, but it's been quite busy this year. So
Yes.
it's fine. We're seeing the other end of it now.
Yeah, and if anybody isn't following Una on Twitter, you got to see what she says about Enterprise as she's watching it, because I've quite enjoyed those comments.
Yeah, people are going to have to hunt for that because I got to the end, so I watched it in just under a month. So
wow.
I really committed to that. I thought if I stopped on the Zindi season, I'd never pick up again. So I kind of powered through and propped my eyes open and then got to the fun stuff in season 4.
Yes.
But I really enjoyed it. It's a show that never lives up to its promise, but when it does, it's a hoot, I think.
Excellent. So for people who maybe haven't followed you yet on Twitter, your handle there is?
At Una McCormack. So it's just my name. Very straightforward.
Perfect.
If you can spell that, you can find me.
Nice and easy. Excellent.
Great. There's only one thing I'm disappointed about is some of my favorite projects that you work on are called I Can't Talk About It Right Now.
It's always the way, isn't it?
But I want you to take your August off, enjoy it, rest, so you can come back at this again, and it'll be fantastic.
Yeah, we'll talk Spock and Firefly.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, we've been waiting on that Spock one for a while. I know it's not your fault. We're not going to get into
don't
that.
do it. No. Take that up with other people.
Yeah, we're not
I'm just the writer.
Yeah, you're just the writer. We know that.
I don't even know the story there. I'm just like, I'll write you a book.
Yeah, exactly. So, hey, Dan, when people want to follow you, where can they do it?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Kurtrats. That's KERTRATS, and youtube.com/Kurtrats Productions, and Treklit.com, where I review Star Trek novels, both old and new. And
I'm on Twitter at Admiral_Rex, and Instagram just Admiral Rex, and occasionally on the Star Wars Report podcast, and been guesting on Literary Treks. And so, yeah, that's about it. So, Una, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for this book.
Always my pleasure.
So
always my pleasure.
We wish you the best.
You got me first on this podcast round, so all my stories are really fresh.
Yay! This was your practice round for all the other interviews.
Exactly, yeah. The anecdotes are absolutely freshly plucked from the tree.
Nice. Well, thanks everyone
Excellent.
for listening, and thanks to our associate producer, William Smith. And we just want to end things with, read this book if you haven't read it. We just told you the whole story, but it's still worth reading if you haven't read it. And also, stay positive.